because it's
don't mansplain it to me.
Some feminist commentators have argued this petty name-calling is actually hurting the hard-fought feminist cause. In a new column for The Spectator, Ayaan Hirsi Ali hones in on the problem, writing, "Much of modern feminism," and I want to emphasise that I in no way mean to denigrate all modern feminists, seems to be more interested in vengeance than fairness. Whereas feminists of the past focused on attaining legal and social equality between men and women, too many today desire power rather than real justice. How else to explain the authoritarianism envisaged by many feminists over utterly trivial issues like so-called man-spreading? So, with these new terms hot on the lips of every aggrieved feminist, are they undermining their own cause by slamming men for mansplaining and man-spreading? Dan at gbnews.uk, my email. Vote in my poll at GB News on Twitter. The results shortly. But to help you make up your mind, I'm joined by the comedian and political activist Kate Smurthwaite and the women's rights campaigner Kellie-Jay Keen. Kelly, does it undermine feminism to talk so much about mansplaining and manspreading as this new column in The Spectator today claimed?
Well, I think it probably does, because a lot of modern feminism doesn't really, is not willing to say what a man is, or a woman for that matter. So when we're on the basis when the very first bit of both of those insults starts with something that most women or modern day feminists are too frightened to define, I think it's a bit of a lost cause, isn't it?
Kate Smurthwaite?
Well, I just, like, the twaddle you come up with, Dan, just never fails to amaze me. Like, first of all, the idea that terms like manspreading or mansplaining are somehow weaponized. Like, they're just little jokey terms that some women use to describe some behaviors that men do that might be, might not be deliberately, belittling women, or they might not be deliberately taking up more than one seat on the tube. But, ultimately, they're just little jokey phrases that we use. And the idea that they close down any argument. I mean, you then showed some arguments which continued after the word had been used. So nobody's being closed down. It's just like, do you know what I mean? If you keep eating oaty biscuits, eventually you'll think of a short name for it, and then it's called a hobnob.
I think you're being very sexist, by the way, very sexist by claiming that it's me coming up with this twaddle. This is a brilliant new column by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a great female writer in The Spectator. It's not me saying this, it's her.
Right, OK, well, here's another thing, Dan. Like, there are millions, billions of women around the world, and none of us have exactly the same opinions on any subject. And lots of us are, of course, enthusiastic about improving, women's lot in life, in narrowing the pay gap, ending sexual violence, all those kind of things. And there are lots and lots of different issues which women get.
Yes, but the question is, Kate, the question is talking about mansplaining and manspreading undermining the important causes that you might be fighting for? That's the question.
Like, if you think that women should only be allowed to talk about what the most important issue is, then sure, I'll jump in and talk about female refugees who are escaping rape and they need to be granted asylum immediately in the UK, and the disgusting things I've just heard Nigel Farage say, and I don't think racist twaddle like that should be allowed on any station. If you're here to ask me about the term mansplaining, some people use it and some people think of it as a kind of feminist term, but feminism is not an organisation. We don't have an AGM. We don't all think the same thing. It's the campaign for women's liberation and women's equality, and as such... Well,
you seem to think a lot is twaddle today, Kate. Certainly nothing racist, and so far you're the only one who's been sexist tonight. Kellie-Jay, you want to respond?
Yeah, I'd just be interested to know, when we talk about, modern feminists, where they've been, because lots of modern feminists, Kate included, don't seem to want to talk about the existential threat posed by transgender ideology hang on one moment, on women's spaces, on the fact that there are boys and girls toilets in schools and girls don't have access to single-sex facilities, on the basis that we are changing. This is what happens. Modern feminism, the biggest threat to women in this country right now, women and girls in this country, is transgender ideology and the fact that we no longer can define what a woman is without some silly caveat. And we've got men. So actually, we might even now have women man-spreading or woman-spreading because they might require this space, apparently. And then we've got self-proclaimed feminists like Kate Smurthwaite, who are too frightened to actually name this issue and talk about it. I think it's laughable that we can talk about.
Well, I think you just triggered her. I think you just triggered her, Kelly, to the point that she just did the laptop drop. You know, it's the modern day equivalent of marching out the studio, which is a shame. It's a shame. I want to have open and free speech here.
It's a shocking state of feminism. Look, at Standing for Women, we've come up with feminism, which centres females. The only qualification you have to be a feminist is to know what a woman is and know what a female is and actually be one of those.
Oh, Kate's back.
That's it.
Kate's back. So, Kate, you didn't storm off.
£2,000.
You didn't storm off, Kate.
No, I have said millions and millions of times that I'm absolutely sick and tired of right-wing news channels trying to stir up hatred between feminists and trans rights campaigners. Of course, there are minor areas in which people have differences of opinion, but this is an attempt to divide. I haven't finished, Kelly, and I will speak until I have. This is an area which is absolutely one of the things that is whipped up into a needless media frenzy. Every feminist I know is dedicated to issues like ending sexual violence, like protecting women's prisons, and all of these things. And the fact that you would get on people to deliberately set up. I've said before that if I am pushed into discussing this issue, I've said in advance that I don't think it's a suitable subject for a deliberately aggressive, confrontational discussion like this. I haven't finished, Kelly, and you'll let me finish, Dan. I have said before that...
Well, it's actually my show, Kate, and we have two sides of the argument here, and I've got to get both in. And, Kate, this is a debate on mansplaining and manspreading and the appropriateness of that. I'm not going to censor one of my guests, but you might want to know, Kate, that later on in the show, I've got Caitlyn Jenner on, probably the most famous trans woman in the world, who will be talking about female sport. But I'm not going to censor what Kellie-Jay has to say, just like I would never censor what you have to say.
Researchers repeatedly, over and over again, that I think this issue is whipped up into an unnecessary and unreasonable debate by people.
Men and women's spaces is whipped up. Men and women's spaces is whipped up.
I haven't finished.
Well, you're talking for a very long time. And I can't mansplain time to you, but if you talk all the time, then I can't speak.
Well, no, you both have to speak, Kate. So, Kate, you make your point, your final point, and then I'll get Kelly to make her final point. But it's a two-way discussion, Kate. That's how this works.
I will make my point, and that's the end of it. I have repeatedly said to your researchers that I believe that this issue, where, of course, there are minor differences of viewpoint, has been whipped up by a handful of extremists who are taking a very extreme point on it. And shows like yours do this to undermine women's rights and to undermine LGBT rights. And overall, overwhelmingly, those sets of rights are actually in the same place, and we're actually all campaigning for the same thing. And on big, broad issues, it's super important that we work together. And for that reason, I have always refused to participate in debates on that subject. I have made it very clear to your producers that if you do persist in asking me questions about that subject, my fee goes up.
I didn't ask you one question about the subject. This is a debate about manspreading and mansplaining. But Kellie-Jay, who is a feminist, brought up the issue. So, Kelly, final word to you.
Well, I'm happy to say I left feminism quite some time ago because a lot of the feminists, as clearly shown by
Kate, listen. Here, Kate, listen. Stop talking for a second, Kate. Listen. Show some respect, Kate. Stop talking, Kate. Listen.
I think, oh, she's obviously gone. I think, you know, many women who call themselves feminists like Kate have been burned by talking about this issue, and then they've been cancelled and they've lost work. And so I have great sympathy with some women like Kate who refuse to talk about it, but not that much sympathy, because while she refuses to talk about it and she's talking about male violence, there have been men in women's prisons raping women. So I can't call myself a feminist in any good conscience, whilst it still repeats this narrative. Minor conflict Men in women's spaces is not minor conflict.
No.
So feminism is the future. Feminism is not fit for purpose.
OK, well, look, I wouldn't dream of trying to censor you, Kellie, just like I would not dream trying to censor Kate, who seemed to want to come on to GB News and have a censored discussion. That's not what we do here. Thank you so much, Kellie-Jay Keen, women's rights campaigner. So who do you agree with? Are feminists undermining their own cause by slamming men for mansplaining and manspreading? Sage on Twitter says, as a woman, I am heartily sick of continued attacks on men, predominantly white. Many of the people I love and respect are men. I can no longer call myself a feminist. From Zara.